This is Slidell Burton, the esteemed mayor of Steve's Ridge. The head honcho, if you will. And you are going to listen to my favorite show, Let's Find Out with co-host Diego. And that's how it's going to be now, you hear?
Are you curious about the unknown, the unexplainable? Do you find yourself intrigued by the mysterious and paranormal side of our world? Join us on an adventure into the world of inexplicable discoveries and investigations that may someday give us the final answer as to what may be behind the veil of reality. The borders of space and time have opened once again, and transmitting from the mountains of West Virginia, it's time once again for Let's Find Out with Diego. The universe is waiting for you.
The borders of space and time have opened once again, and transmitting from the mountains of West Virginia, it's another episode of Let's Find Out with Diego. Thank you for taking this journey with me on this episode of Let's Find Out. Our guest is well known for being a walking encyclopedia of horror flicks, especially the 80s slashers, and has been writing for the majority of his life. His first book, Nightmare Tales, was published in 2006, and he has had several short stories published in a number of collections. Our guest currently writes articles, conducts interviews, and reviews movies and books for horrornews.net, and has appeared in a handful of low-budget horror pictures. Not only that, but he has written several full-length horror films such as Deathboard and the upcoming horror films Crackcoon and Crocodile. We will be digging into all this plus more. Please welcome to Let's Find Out a new friend to the show, actor and director Todd Martin. Todd, my friend, welcome to Let's Find Out. It's a pleasure having you on our show.
Thanks so much, man. I'm so glad to be here today with you.
Yeah, and I've been looking forward to this for a few weeks now, and I know we booked this about a couple of months in advance, which is usually when people are busy like us, have all these projects. We got to plan it more ahead than most. With that being said, because there are two titles that really caught my attention, Crackcoon and Crocodile, which we'll be talking about later on the show. And it sounds amazing, but before we dive into that, my friend, I didn't even know where to start because your bio looks amazing. So let's go back. We'll take our time machine. We'll do the Martin McFly thing. We'll fly back in time and talk about your first book, because this is 2006. Book is titled Nightmare Tales. Can you give us a quick look at what that book was about?
Yeah, it's a horror anthology. There's a little bit of everything in there. There's like a Christmas themed one called Ornaments. There's a one about a guy who gets dumped, and it's more of like a, not so much horror, but it's kind of a haunting, everybody's been dumped and you know what you go through when you've been dumped, and one of those kind of deals. There's a werewolf one in there. There's a vampire one, a little bit of everything. A lot of these stories I had actually written when I was in college, like back in 98 or so, and they just kind of sat around collecting dust, and I finally submitted them to a publishing company, and they were like, hey, we'll give you a shot. So one of the stories that appears in it, Stephanie Beaton, Scream Queen from back in the day, she actually, me and her, we met at a horror film convention in Ohio, Cinema Wasteland, and we just kind of hit it off. And this was like back in 2003 or so. And she did a sequel to one of her anthology films. It's called Tales from the Grave 2, Happy Holidays. And my story, the Christmas story Ornaments, that appears in Nightmare Tales, I adapted it into a screenplay. It actually shows, it's one of the segments that is actually featured in Tales from the Grave 2, Happy Holidays. So that was my first film that I ever wrote that actually, saw the light of day. So that was cool. Props to Stephanie Beaton for taking a chance with me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and during that time you were writing, you were in college, you were writing the stories, put them all together. Did you ever think, because we're talking about on the pre-interview how you and I were 70s and 80s guys, and when you grew up watching these kind of movies or listening to the music, did you ever think that you ever get to write a first book with short stories or collections or anything like that?
I didn't. It's kind of surreal because when I was in 7th grade, this was like in '87, we had study hall, and while I was in study hall, I didn't do my homework. There was a guy named Tommy that had all these Fangoria magazines, and I would always read his Fangoria magazines while I was in study hall. And back then, 12-year-old Todd never thought, "Hey, one day I'm actually going to write a movie like this." And so it's kind of a surreal feeling to know that something I wrote actually saw the light of day eventually, which is a good feeling.
Yeah, because it's not every day that you get to do the things that you love, not only write about it, but make films as well. And
Right.
going on the writing part, you started doing, and I'm not really sure where in the timeline this falls, so I might jump all over the place, but you started writing reviews of
Probably.
movies and interviewing. Um, when did this start? And on the second part of that question, because I know that it's very important. What do you look for in a movie when you review it, or anything like that? Is it the acting? Is it the storylines? Is it the special effects? What do you look for?
I think it's a combination of everything, but the storyline's got to be, if the story premise isn't interesting to me, I'm not going to really get into it, so to speak. I grew up on slasher films. I love slasher flicks. So that always appeals to me. Uh, 80s was, of course, the golden age of the slasher film. And, you know, my fondest memory growing up is my mom and I going to the video store. God, I miss video stores. Uh, but we would go and rent slasher flicks mostly. And I think that inspired me to want to write those kind of movies and short stories and things like that. So I think the premise, of course, when that's the thing that really I look into. And if it's something that doesn't sound interesting, I'm probably not going to really put much effort into it, or not so much put so much effort into it, but it's not going to really be one of those things where I'm like, "Ooh, I'm excited about this." But also like the special effects, the acting, characters is important. If you care about the characters, that's a huge deal to me. Because if you watch a movie and the characters are like, I could care less if they live or die, you've kind of lost the battle right out the front door there. But I started doing reviews and everything for horror news back in 2009. Um, and I started out, I was doing book reviews, and then I started doing movie reviews. And then it was kind of like I was doing interviews, I was doing lists and things like that. And so I'd been with them for a while. Recently started working with Pop Horror, and I've done a couple of lists for them. My next one's going to be coming out here in a few weeks, possibly sooner than that. I'm working on a list of the scariest uh, robots in movies because robots freak me out. They always terrify me. So I've got that list I'm working on now. I just finished up the saddest horror movie moments, and that's online on pophorror.com right now.
It's funny you brought up the whole thing with robots. I'm trying to think of the name of the robot. So if you remember back, it might have been the late 70s, early 80s. When you get to reach a certain age, some of these things start blurring the lines. You don't know what decade they came out.
Yeah.
And I'm not, and I don't pull up the Google, so I don't cheat. You remember the black hole?
Yes, Maximilian.
Maximilian. That thing terrified me as a kid.
And it completely slaughtered Norman Bates, or Anthony Perkins, I should say. And I always thought it was depressing that it killed the other little robot that was all beat to hell and everything.
That was the saddest part of the movie.
Yeah, Maximilian was terrifying. I agree.
And staying with the topic of that timeline. So you talked about your friend having the Fangoria magazines in school, but there has to be that one movie or that one director that finally made your mind click. That's like, this is something I would like to do in the future. So can you, out of all the movies you've seen, you've probably seen thousands of them and written many reviews, can you pinpoint that one, I don't know if it's one movie or director that say, holy crap, this is what I want to do?
That would have to be Sleepaway Camp. I love Sleepaway Camp. It's my favorite movie of all time. I've met Felissa Rose and Jonathan Tiersten, who played Ricky and Angela, both awesome people. Weird story. Back in the day, and I'm sure you remember this, you could rent movies pretty much anywhere in the 80s. There was a gas station that my mom and I used to go to, and they had like a little carousel. They had these movies, and this is in '87. So they had Sleepaway Camp, and we got it. took it up to the counter, and they were like, "Oh, it's rented out." We didn't realize it, and so for weeks we tried to rent it, and we eventually did. My mom rented it when I was at the arcade, watched it, and she wasn't too big on it. She kind of spoiled it for me. She came to pick me up at the arcade and said, "Yeah, I watched that movie. It was okay." And she kind of spoiled the ending, but I ended up watching it anyway, and I loved it. And to this day, I can't. There's no telling how many times I've seen that movie, but it's one of those that really inspired me to get into this business, and that and the Friday the 13th movies, Nightmare on Elm Street. Oh man, I was such a Freddy mark back in the day. I I love the fourth one. I mean, the first one's my favorite, but I love the Dream Master, and I think it's because I always kind of had a little crush on Brooke Theus, who plays Debbie in it, and yeah, that movie is just awesome. It's got an awesome soundtrack too. I know some people think that that's when Freddy started to, went downhill, but there's just something about that installment that I really dug. And I remember writing like short stories about Freddy around that same time and everything. So maybe I had to dig those up sometime and do a fan film.
Yeah, Nightmare on Elm Street, groundbreaking at its time, because I think I like the first one, but the second one, something about the second one really got me. And
Yeah.
talk about Jason movies, and and I know it's a very unpopular thing, but I was a big fan of 4.
Yeah, I love
And
it.
yeah, 4 was done amazing. I think it after that it became a little more sci-fi-ish with 6 part 6, when he was resurrected from the grave and the lightning struck and he killed Arnold Horshack during the first
Yeah.
part of the movie. So, but I'm still a fan of that, of course.
But it's weird. We saw the third one. The first one I ever saw, we saw part 3 at a drive-in. My mom and dad, sister, and I. It was a summer between 3rd and 4th grade. I'm showing my age here, but back then Jason was actually scary. I was terrified when I went home that night. Freddy was the same way. It's funny, kids today they think they're, I don't want to say a joke, but they don't think they're funny, or they don't think they're scary. But at one time, Jason and Freddy were terrifying. you know, uh, I love the fourth Friday the 13th, and it's, I were around the same age, so I remember when it first came out, we were naive enough to believe this is actually it. They're not going to do anymore, and then lo and behold, there's what 8 more after that. So, but I like the 6th one too, because Jason's hardcore in it and somewhat scary because he's like indestructible, So, but I like most of the Friday the 13th movies. I've always been a Jason guy, so.
I even like Jason X, and that's another unpopular thing. I think it's a fun sci-fi movie to watch.
My wife actually hates it, but I love it. I think it's fine. I like Jason Takes Manhattan personally.
I was just thinking about that when I remember the scene at the top of the roof when the guy was punching Jason in the face, and Jason that one punch took the guy's head right out.
Yeah. And it's funny, that's when Jason starts teleporting for the first time. The scene where the guy climbs up the thing on the boat, he looks down and Jason's looking up at him, and then Jason is over him. And it's like, what the hell, guys? But it's a fun movie for what it is. I know it takes a lot of crap, but I think my least rate's probably 5, and because Jason's not in it. I mean, you think it's Jason, but it turns out, spoiler alert, it's Roy, the ambulance driver. But that's probably my least favorite of the entire series, to be honest.
Yeah, it was a bit disappointing because if you become a fan of that character, it's like, oh, is this Yahoo? But, that's fine too. I think they get a mulligan on that one, as they say.
Yeah. And you got to think, at that time, this was 85, that was unheard of that a movie series had 5 installments, because I remember seeing the trailer for it and just being like, oh my God, they're actually doing a 5th one. I think Rocky did it like a year later, maybe 6 months later, but best I might be wrong here, but the best of my knowledge, my memory anyway, Friday the 13th was the first movie series to have a part 5, and it was just like, when I was a kid, it was amazing. So I was like, oh my God, they're actually doing a 5th one. Imagine my disappointment when we find out it's not Jason.
Yeah. And now it's the thing, because a lot of movies now have sequels, and I guess they just, if it lands well, they do a whole franchise out of it, and there's merchandise to be sold, and there's other things too. So I mean, it's okay as long as the spirit of the characters is still in there.
Yeah, I agree. And I like Michael Myers a lot. My wife, she's all into Michael. Like that's one of the goofy things that my wife and I argue about. Who would want to fight between Jason and Michael Myers? I've got to go with Jason, and she says
I,
Michael. So
I was going to answer the question myself. I think it's Jason, 100%.
yeah, yeah. My wife and I also argue who the best Ninja Turtle is. I say Michelangelo, and she says Raphael. But
I agree with
these
your
are
wife. It's Raphael.
I mean, I like all of them, but I'm more like Michelangelo, like personality wise. So I've got to go with Michelangelo. He's my favorite.
You know, and overall, Turtle's very entertaining. I remember going on a little tangent here. Just like your friend in school that had the Fangoria, I had this cat I used to know. He used to bring the comic books back then. They were black and white, the Teenage Mutant
Awesome.
Ninja Turtle ones. And then, I mean, the whole thing just blew up from there on. So we're gonna go back, and I know we're talking about your writing and the filmmaking, but you also did some movies as well, right? You had a lot of parts in them. So which movies did you do?
My wife and I were in Sharks of the Corn recently. Um, that is probably the most fun I've ever had on a movie set. Tim Ritter, who did Truth or Dare, that series, Killing Spree, he wrote and directed Sharks of the Corn, and you will not find a nicer, more down to earth person than Tim Ritter. Guy is just salt of the earth. I love working with him. Uh, but it was so fun. Like that. That was such a great experience. Sharks of the Corn, great cast. Uh, Tim is the type that he likes for you to kind of improv your lines, and he'll give you a script, but he's like, if you want to run with it, that's cool. And I do that a lot. And a lot of my lines in that movie, I just kind of pulled out of my butt. So, uh, but it was such a good experience. We had so much fun, and I've worked with Tim several times. We did a movie, High Def and High Fear. We were in the segments that he wrote for those anthologies. My wife and I were both in Truth or Dare 4 and 5. And it's always just a real pleasure to work with Tim. He's such a good guy. And he's so down to earth. He's one of those guys that I don't think he realizes how awesome he is. Like he has a following, but he has zero ego. Just an all around good guy. And I loved him, and every opportunity I get to work with him, I jump at it. So we did that one. I was trying to think what else I've actually been in. Most of the stuff that I've actually acted in was with Tim. Um, done a couple of things that never were released. I think that might be on my IMDb page, but the biggest majority of my acting comes from working with Tim Ritter. So
It's one of these questions I like to ask guests that have been, both actors, directors, filmmakers, and such, that there are different levels of pressure when it comes to being involved with a project. So I'll ask you, because you have a lot of this experience. So you've done both the acting and also filmmaking. Which one of those, I wouldn't say stresses you out the most, but which one of those makes you a little bit more nervous than the other to do?
So I tried to direct. I've never really direct. I'm more of a writer, and I'm like the guy that shows up to be in the movie. That's either the comedy relief or the smart ass that gets killed first. I tried to direct back in 2003, and it was a nightmare. Of course, this was a low budget film. It was just like with friends and people I worked with were in it. It was called The Gardener. It's a script that I wrote about a gardener that goes nuts and starts killing people. And we only could film on Sundays because that was like the only time, like work schedules and everything. And it was a nightmare. I didn't know what I was getting into. We had one of the actresses who every week when we filmed shooting or would wrap, she would say, "Well, I'm not going to be back next week." And uh, I was actually in this thing too. And my death scene, I get the hell beat out of me and I'm killed. And the killer puts me in a car. She opens the car door and I like flop out. And I've got fake blood running in my eyes and mouth, and I'm drowning in it. And she's supposed to scream, and I'm waiting for her to scream, and she doesn't. and it's a good 15 seconds, and she looks over at the camera and goes, "I don't scream. That's not me." So that was what I work. That's what I was working with the gardener. uh, Not much of a director, so to speak. I mean, I might give it a shot again eventually because I think that I've gotten to the point where I know enough people that I could rely on. I think that we could put something together with me in charge, but I'm much more comfortable being the writer and doing like the bit parts in films too. So
And there's always one of those, whatever project you're on, where I think there's a personality clash in some of them. Some people are not reliable, but
right.
but you kind of really need them to show up to work at the same time.
And the thing is, I think that a lot of people don't realize that making a film is actually work. They think that it's just, well, I'm going to be in the scene and we'll shoot it in 3 minutes and we're done. They don't understand that, a single 3 minute scene can take hours, and they don't want to have anything to do with it once they realize that it's actual work. It's not all fun and games, and it's frustrating, and it's hard work. That's why I applaud all the low budget filmmakers, independent filmmakers that go out there and actually put something together. It's not easy, and like I said, I might try to direct again one day. We'll see. Never say never, but I'm much happier with doing the writing and maybe doing a cameo every once in a while.
Yeah, I would imagine it's a little less stressful, but writing in itself, I'm sure, has a whole different kind of stress. So I'm fascinated to learn more about Crackcoon and Crocodile, but because I like movies about animals or monsters that terrify a small city, I mean a small town or a city. I'm a big fan of that kind of things. Do you remember in the '70s talking about crocodiles? But I think it was called Alligator.
Heck yeah.
Story
Oh,
was where this kid had a little baby alligator flushed down the toilet, and then
yeah.
it became this humongous alligator and just started eating people. I think it was in New York or Chicago or
Yeah.
something.
Best scene in that movie is when they're making the kid walk the plank in the swimming pool. You remember that?
Barely, but it sounds. I'm gonna go back and watch it. I think it's funny.
Oh, that movie is awesome. It's got like some dark humor in it and a great cast. I love that movie. I remember seeing it for the first time. I was like in fourth grade. It was on regular television, like on ABC, and I was just like, "Oh my god, this is amazing!" Of course, I love Jaws, and that was like, you know, at the time, Jaws and Alligator were the greatest movies ever made in my mind.
Yeah,
But
and then you
both of
have
them,
these other types. I'm sorry I interrupted you, but
you're
there
fine.
are these other types like piranha, and then
Hmm.
the one called with the rats, Ben. So there's
Hmm.
always this kind of theme, but with animals or something. They're going out of control, started killing people, which brings me to my awful segue into Crackcoon and Crocodile, my friend. What's the background on these? Because I looked at the covers of the films, and I'm already hooked on it. So can you tell the
Awesome.
listeners a little bit more about what's going on with these two films?
Okay, so Brad Twigg, who I work with a lot, Brad directed Shriek Show. He directed Deathboard, directed Killer Campout and Russell Massacre. Him and I work together on. I usually will. He'll contact me and be like, "I've got an idea. Can you kind of flesh it out a little bit and write it?" And he told me that he wanted to do a movie called Crackcoon about a raccoon that gets into this super crack and goes on a killing spree. So uh, it was so much fun to write. We have a great cast. Basically, that's all you really need to know is about a raccoon that gets into crack, and kind of like Cocaine Bear, of course, but he goes on a killing spree, and the puppet that they use, it's an animatronic. Uh, it's amazing looking. The trailer is online actually. It's going to be premiering in Maryland at the State Theater on the 25th of May. Um, but the trailer is so fun. It's got a trauma feel to it. The movie does. It's not too serious. I mean, you got a cracked out
Right.
raccoon. So, but it looks great, and it's gotten quite a bit of buzz. It's kind of funny if you look up, just do a Google search for Crackcoon, you'll see like all over the world. Actually, people are talking about it. So we're actually doing it as a series. I actually worked on Crocodile, which is the same kind of idea where a crocodile gets into the super crack called Agent Orange. is the name of the crack, and he goes on a killing spree. The third of this series is called Squatch. It's about a Sasquatch that gets into the crack. I didn't work on it. John Killall, who did Skinned Alive, I believe, is working on that script. So it should be a lot of fun. And then we kind of have an offshoot that I just completed the script on called Crackula, which is about Dracula who gets hooked on crack blood. So, yeah.
Oh, I gotta ask though, how in the hell are they getting a hold of all this crack?
You have to watch the movies and find it. Find out.
No, fair enough, because
well, I'll give you this one. The first in Crackcoon, the two drug dealers are going to this little town to sell it to some people that are like having a party out in the middle of nowhere, and they think they see a cop, so they throw the duffel bag of drugs out the window, and that's when the raccoon finds it and eats it. So, but I'll give you that one.
No, now it's starting to make sense. But you mentioned something about a Bigfoot or Sasquatch finding the crack. Now, you're out there in the yonder like I am, but we're on opposite sides here.
Yeah.
Have you heard about a lot of these sightings of Bigfoot, like especially like in Kentucky, West Virginia, and Virginia? Is there anything going on in your neck of the woods out there?
You know, our thing in Kentucky now, probably about 20 miles down the road from where I live, there's a family that claims that, and I'm not saying they're lying, of course, but they say that Bigfoot kind of shows up routinely, but they don't have any proof of it. I mean, by all means, I hope it's true. I would love for it to be, because I don't want to live in a world where Bigfoot and werewolves don't exist. I love, but our big thing now is sheep squatch here in Kentucky. I don't know if you're familiar with sheep squatch.
I am. I actually have a picture of it right next to me.
Also, which is, it's in Cloverport, Kentucky, which is only about 45 minutes from where I live. But I personally have never seen Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or sheep squatch. Always wanted to, but I like werewolves, so I always would love to think that there's werewolves in Kentucky. Maybe there is, maybe there's not. Hopefully one will bite me and I'll become a werewolf one day. So
no, because I know Virginia has had Southern Virginia from Richmond down that been a lot of sightings of werewolves and stuff like that as well. So it's kind of a thing that's also it's been gaining in popularity as well.
Yeah, I love werewolves. The Howling is one of my favorite movies. When I was a kid, it freaked me out. I remember we watched it. Remember those big eyesore satellite dishes that they used to have that we had? We lived in a trailer out in the country, and we got this big satellite dish, and you actually had to go out and manually hand crank it to get different channels and everything. And it was the middle of the winter. This was probably in 85, maybe 84. We had a wood stove. And after we watched The Howling, my dad was like, "You've got to go out and get some firewood." I had to go behind a garage, and I just knew that I was going to get mauled by one of the werewolves from The Howling. I was terrified, but I love that movie. It's so good. Probably my favorite werewolf movie ever. And I've just always been fascinated with werewolves. Just between us, I've always had this, when I was a kid, I had this fear that I was going to stay all night with a friend, and it was going to turn out that the entire family were werewolves and they were going to kill me. So maybe that's an idea for a movie one day. Ooh.
No, yeah, I think that with The Howling, they had a lot of sequels. I remember the second one. What's it called? The Howling 2, Your Sister's a Werewolf 2, something like that. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, Your Sister's a Werewolf. With
yeah.
Danny.
And but the one that hit me the most was it was just so well done, even for its time. It still holds up. American Werewolf in London. That one scared the crap out of me as a kid.
Oh, the effects are awesome. 81 was a hell of a year for horror movies, because both of those came out in 81. And you have your camps that are like, American Werewolf in London's better. No, The Howling is. I'm more on the Howling side, but I love American Werewolf in London as well. I think they're both great werewolf movies, and it's been a while since we've gotten a really good werewolf movie, in my opinion. So I think Ginger Snaps is probably the last one that I was really into.
Right on the top of my head, I can't think of one.
Really?
Yeah.
I
I
always kind
mean,
of wanted werewolves to get their due, like zombies and vampires, were all the rage there for a while, and ghosts, and poor werewolves just never really got any love. So maybe sooner or later it'll happen.
I think it goes in cycles, kind of like vampire movies. And for me, of course, 80s. We're talking about Lost Boys, but I was a big fan of 30 Days of Night. That was probably one of my
Yeah,
favorite vampire movies ever.
I like the comic too. The comic's really good. I'm a big comic nerd, so I liked it. I like Near Dark. I loved the Lost Boys when it first came out. I was all obsessed with it there for a while when I first saw it on VHS. I was in the 8th grade, and it still holds up really well. The
It
sequels are terrible,
does.
but
Yeah, and then also, I can't believe I even forgot this was Silver Bullet.
I love Silver Bullet. It's funny that Gary Busey is in it, and he's not really Gary Busey in it. I mean, but it's a good movie. I like it. I know a lot of people complain about the way the werewolf looks in it, but they're like, "Oh, it looks like a bear," but I think it's fine. It's hard to do a decent looking werewolf.
I think so, especially, no CGI back then. So, that was pretty much what they
Yeah,
had. I think they did a great job anyway. So,
yeah.
and staying on that decade, it's the greatest decade of all time, in my opinion.
Oh, it
But,
was. I miss the '80s so much. Like good TV shows, good horror films, cartoons, action figure lines. It was just everything was awesome about the '80s. Music.
I was just
I
going with
grew
the
up with
music.
Yeah, I grew up with Dokken, Motley Crue. Hell, I liked Winger.
Back then was unpopular, but now that you listen to it, you know what? I think Winger got a lot of crap for no reason. But here's the reason I bring this up. Talking about the decade of the 80s, the greatest decade of all space and time. A lot of great franchises came out of the 80s as well.
Hmm.
So there are those movies that call them one-offs where they didn't get the attention I think they deserved. And if you were to go back to that time, could you pick out one or two horror movies that, in your opinion, needs to be given a little more credit or more love? And I'm going to give you mine first before you go into
Okay.
yours because I have them right in front of me, and they both have the listeners will not be able to see this, so I think you'll recognize it right off the top as soon as I show it to you. So we go with the Trick or Treat,
Oh, dude, I love Trick or Treat.
and
Sammy
then
Kerr.
Sammy Kerr, and then the DVD re-release was. They put Gene Simmons and Ozzy, I guess, to try to get people to buy it. And they're
Yeah,
minimal
they,
characters in the movie,
yeah.
but great storyline. I think I really liked, especially for back then. It was very relevant for the headbangers like me and you back then. So, and the soundtrack was amazing by Fastway.
Best way. Hell yeah.
So, if
Uh,
you could go back then, just pick one or two that you think deserve a little more love.
um, this is '89. It's a movie that came a little late to the party. Intruder, I think, is amazing. Scott Spiegel did it. Ted Raimi and Ted and Sam and Bruce Campbell are all in it. It's about a grocery store that's going out of business, and some of the just the greatest death scene. The death scenes are awesome, and I love that movie. Like I said, it came out in '89. It was kind of when the slasher thing was kind of going downhill, and there wasn't as much interest in it. And I think it's a classic, and it doesn't get as much love as it deserves. Would be my first pick. I think my second one, this is in the '90s, would be Dr. Giggles. I love that movie. Uh, I think they could have done totally could have done a series of those. But again, I think Dr. Giggles came too late to the party. The slasher thing was kind of definitely dead by '92 when it came out. So those are my two picks, that the hidden gems that don't get as much love as they deserve. So
And that's true. And I think during that time, late 80s, early 90s, there was another movie company out there that was kind of getting a lot of steam, but it kind of burned out too. It was Full Moon. And
yeah,
they put out some great stuff. We talk about subspecies, talk about Doll Man, demonic toys,
Puppet
and
Master.
Puppet Masters. But as
I
things
like
go
Full
on,
Moon.
yeah, they made a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, they had. It's weird because a lot of their stuff was direct to video, and but it was cool. I mean, yeah, arcade, Shrunken Heads, stuff like that. That was what was the one, Uncle Sam? uh, they were just fun movies. They were almost like Trauma in a weird kind of way. Not as, I mean, I love Trauma. Don't get me wrong, but I think Full Moon took it a little bit more serious. But yeah, I think Full Moon pretty much ruled the early '90s, in my opinion. So
They did because I remember because you were talking about everywhere there was always a video store because we had a 7-Eleven that rented out videos. There was mom and pop ones. When I first got into renting movies when I was younger, you used to have to pay a membership fee to some video stores to be able to rent movies.
eh,
But fast forward, once even the grocery stores started getting videos, you could rent like 6 VHS tapes for like $5,
yeah,
and I would just get like 5 or 6 full moons. That was my whole weekend.
yeah, I agree. I remember there was a carpet store in the town where I grew up. I grew up in a small town, and like everybody rented movies then. And I never will forget, as long as I live, I'll remember that smell of that carpet store. Like it was like new carpet when I went in. And I remember seeing like I would like go back to the movies and they had like The Beast Within and I just remember Mama and I always like whenever I think of those movies, I automatically think of that smell that kind of like when you go to a video store where they were popping popcorn and I love that smell. I miss I miss mom and pop video stores and just video stores in general. Hell, at this point, I'd be happy Blockbuster came back. But
Yeah, because it was something about going there and you just pull the cover out, just read the back of the movie, of the title, and then you read the description of the movie. Say, I think I'll watch this one, and
yeah,
then you'll get that one that that was rented out because it would have the cardboard or the plastic in front, but there was no movie in the back. So it's like, oh crap, I guess that
yeah,
movie's checked out. So if you were to give somebody, and I know crazy segue there,
it's a-
so someone who's looking into get into the industry, if it's not filmmaking or writing or acting, a lot of young filmmakers out there right now, and that's a great thing. It's one of the great things also with social media. You can follow these directors, you can help them, you can help finance their projects and things like that. What kind of advice would you give somebody who's just beginning their journey into filmmaking or writing? Like some of the pitfalls, some advice you would give them to look out for.
okay. First of all, you have to write. And I know so many people that say, and I'll say this too. I want to be a famous actor. I want to act, but they don't act. Or I want to write, but they don't actually write. So, and I'm not trying to come off like an asshole here, but you have to write if you're going to be a writer. And I think you need to read. That'll help you kind of see the format. Watching movies actually has helped me a lot, because I know like when I watch certain movies, it kind of gives me like motivation. Oh, I want to write something kind of like this. You have to write if you want to be a writer. You can't just say, "Hey, I want to be a writer," and not ever write. I write pretty much every day, and I feel guilty when I don't write because there's just some times where I'm just not feeling it, and that's another thing. If you're a writer and you don't feel like writing, don't write because you're going to be able to tell it. People are going to be able to tell that you weren't really into it at the moment because don't force it. I usually write everything by hand first because there's nothing worse than looking at a computer screen and not knowing what to write. Uh, and as I type up what I've written by hand, I usually I edit and I usually change a lot of stuff because let's face it, some things might sound great on paper, but when you hear it out loud, that line's terrible. And I always like to, when I sit down to write, especially with screenplays, I like to write at least 5 pages every time I sit down. Otherwise, I feel like I've just wasted my time. And I like to stop right in the middle of a scene because that gives me excited to sit back down and write again because you're looking forward to it. I will say too, like one of the pitfalls is be careful as a writer who you send your ideas to because there's some mighty shady people out there who will take your idea and not give you credit for it. You can always get a copyright with the Writers Guild. It costs a little bit of money, but here's the thing: if you print out your script and you mail it to yourself, don't open it. that will actually hold up in court if you need to take it to court. It's a poor man's copyright because it's stamped. And so that's what I usually do. I had an issue with this a couple of years ago. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of details just because it's a weird situation, but it saved my butt once. So just be careful, who you trust. And I mean, I love the horror community, but there's some people out there who are a little negative. I would also say, contacts are really important. Make sure that you go to conventions, uh, make friends with people who are in the business. That's helped me a lot. And you know, I think that this industry and just the entertainment industry in general, it it's about 50% talent and 50% pure luck, honestly. uh, and it, you know, my biggest words of advice is, don't give up. You're going to get a lot of rejection letters. Everybody that starts writing thinks, that if you get a rejection letter and you're like, I'm done, you probably don't need to be in this business. I've gotten more rejection letters than I can count. So don't let it get discouraged. Don't be discouraged by it. Just keep plugging away. And, if you love the industry, you love horror as much as I do, you know, keep going at it, man. Eventually, I've been writing forever and it's just now starting to get me where I want to be. So it's not going to happen overnight. So that's my big words of advice here.
No, that's all. That's all awesome what you just said because you got to put in the work, and eventually down the road, everything pays off if you just keep going.
Yeah. And you can't get discouraged. I know so many people that wrote one script and they sent it to whoever and they were like, not interested. And they were like, well, I'm done writing. And you had to be realistic too. You can't write one script and send it to, like, say, Universal and expect they're gonna, take it and run with it. Which I think some people think that's the way it happens now, but it really doesn't.
No,
So
because also they have thousands of other scripts that get sent to them. Also, that you're also in competition with other writers.
right, and make sure you format your screenplay. I know I've heard this from so many people that as soon as they get a screenplay, like in a studio, even an independent studio, if it's not formatted right, they just throw it right in the trash. And make sure you spell check and grammar check. I use Trelby screenplay software. It's free to download. That's a good resource. It formats it for you and everything. Easy to use. So I'm plugging Trelby here.
Oh, that's just fine, my friend. And so, for the listeners to Let's Find Out that would like to learn more about what you do, and then, of course, learn more about Crackcoon, Crackodile, and any of the other projects you're involved with, where can they find this information at?
Okay, I'm on Facebook. I since my link, I can never think of my actual Facebook address. But if you want to publish it on your site, that's fine. You can always contact me through email at toddmartin101@gmail.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. Like I said, I can't think of my Instagram account address right now, but I'm always happy to get emails. So send me an email. I just want to do a cheap plug here. In addition to Crackula and Crackcoon and Crocodile, I'm working on just finished up Sibylla 6, which Shannon Atkins is directing. They're actually filming it right now. Matt Burns and I are working on, I think they just wrapped shooting on Head on the Writer's Block. It's an anthology that coming out, Matt and I worked on together. We wrote. Got a lot of things going on right now. We have a movie that Matt and I wrote called Vicious Valentines, which is an anthology horror film about dating and just relationships in general that's going to be coming out in a couple of years. They haven't started filming it yet. They're doing casting on it now. Matt Burns is a great guy. I love working with Matt Burns. Just giving some shout outs here. Along with Tim Ritter, Brad Twigg is an awesome guy. I love working with him. Matt Burns is great. Shannon Atkins is awesome. Uh, so many good people in the industry that the indie horror industry that I feel need more love than they get. So
I was early on the show during the pre-interview. So the premiere of, I believe you said it was going to be Crackcoon, right?
Crackcoon,
Yeah.
Crackcoon is coming out. The big premiere is in Maryland at the State Theater on the 25th, and then the following night on the 26th, they're doing Brad's newest movie, Killer Campout 2, in the same venue. So, and you can look it up online. Tickets are available. They're doing a Q&A. I won't be there, unfortunately. I'm in Kentucky. So, but they're doing a Q&A session with some of the cast and crew. And I actually just recently watched Killer Campout 2. It's such a fun movie. I reviewed it for Pop Horror, and I think a lot of people will really get into it. It's really just a fun slasher flick that does feel like an 80s slasher movie. So
Excellent. I'm already sold. I'll be there.
awesome.
Oh, I appreciate you coming on the show, my friend, and please stay in touch. And I look forward to having you later this year because I know you have all these things coming out. And once you release the next films and get something coming, please stop by the show and we'll talk about it.
Heck yeah, I definitely will. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, my friend. This has been another excellent episode of Let's Find Out with Diego. Please check us out on all our socials. YouTube, we're also on Rumble. Like, share, and subscribe also. Let's Find Out is now on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. Catch the show on Saturdays at 2 a.m. For more information, please visit kgradb.com. That's kgradb.com. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Until next time, my friends.
Let's find out with Diego, the power of Diego Mania. All content for Let's Find Out is property of co-host Diego and is served directly from our servers with no modification, redirects, or rehosting. All celebrity impersonators are paid performers. The impersonated celebrities do not endorse or promote any views or opinions expressed by our guests, co-host Diego, or Let's Find Out. The information shared on Let's Find Out is provided on an as-is basis, with no guarantees of completeness, accuracy, usefulness, or timeliness.